The wheelchair creaked against the muddy ground as Etim dragged himself through the village market, his twisted legs folded beneath a tattered wrapper. Children threw stones. Women spat. Men looked away in disgust. "Abomination," they whispered. "Curse one." But in his eyes, those strange, piercing eyes, something ancient burned. Something royal. Something that would soon turn their world upside down. 3 months later, the same villagers would prostrate themselves before him, trembling as they begged forgiveness from the king they had mocked. This is that story. The harmattan wind carried the scent of dried fish and desperation through the narrow paths of Etim. This forgotten village, tucked between mangrove swamps and palm wine bars, survived on fishing, gossip, and ancient superstitions that clung like morning mist. In the heart of this place lived Ima Bassi, 22, university-educated, and burning with ambitions that felt suffocating in a village where a woman's worth was measured by her bride price. Her parents had died in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving her under the guardianship of her uncle, Chief Udo, a man whose love for money exceeded his love for family. "You will marry him," Chief Udo declared that Tuesday morning, his voice cutting through the humid air like a machete. He sat on his plastic chair, belly straining against his worn agbada, counting dirty naira notes. Ima's heart stopped. "Marry who, uncle?" "The cripple. Etim. He's offering 50,000 naira." The words hit her like ice water. Etim, the disabled beggar who lived in a ramshackle hut at the village's edge, surviving on scraps and pity. The man children fled from, women pitied, and men ignored. "You cannot be serious." Ima's voice trembled with barely controlled rage. Chief Udo's eyes glinted with cruel satisfaction. "Dead serious. Your bride price will settle my debts. The marriage happens next week." Ima's world imploded. She had graduated with honors in international relations, had plans to work for the UN, dreams of traveling the world, making a difference, becoming somebody. Now she was being sold like a goat to a man the village considered cursed. "Uncle, please," she begged, falling to her knees. "I'll get a job in Calabar. I'll pay your debts myself. Just don't." "Shut up." Chief Udo's palm cracked against her cheek. "You think you're better than us? Too good for village life? This will humble you." That night, Ima sat by the cross river, tears mixing with the dark water. The village lights flickered behind her like distant stars, so close, yet representing a world that felt increasingly foreign. She could run, board a bus to Lagos, disappear into the anonymous crowds. But Chief Udo had her certificates, her documents. Without them, she was nobody. As if summoned by her despair, a gentle voice spoke from the darkness. "The river doesn't judge the tears it carries." Ima spun around. There, in his battered wheelchair, sat Etim. Up close, she could see the cruel work of whatever had twisted his legs, muscles atrophied, bones set wrong. But his face, there was something unsettling about his face. It was intelligent, dignified, almost noble. "I heard about the arrangement," he said softly. "You don't have to go through with it." "What choice do I have?" she whispered. Etim was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe we both have less choice than we think." Something in his tone made her look at him again. Really look. His clothes were rags, yes, but they were clean. His wheelchair was old but well-maintained. And his voice, it carried an accent she couldn't place. Not village ethic, something more refined. "Who are you really?" she asked. A sad smile crossed his features. "Someone who understands what it means to be trapped by other people's decisions." The wedding was a mockery. Chief Udo invited the whole village, not out of joy, but for the spectacle. They came to watch the proud university girl brought low, married to the village beggar. Women clicked their tongues in false sympathy. Men shook their heads at the waist. Ima wore her mother's wrapper and stood beside Etim as the village elder mumbled prayers over them. She felt like she was attending her own funeral. But then something strange happened. As they spoke their vows, Etim's hand found hers. His grip was firm, warm, reassuring. When she looked into his eyes, she saw not the broken beggar the village knew, but something else entirely. Strength, dignity, secrets. "I promise to protect you," he whispered, and somehow she believed him. After the ceremony, they went to his hut, a small structure that seemed barely habitable from outside. But inside, Ima gasped. The walls were lined with books. Real books. Philosophy, history, law, literature. Some in English, others in languages she didn't recognize. "How?" she breathed. Etim maneuvered his wheelchair with practiced ease. "I wasn't always like this." On the walls hung photographs, old ones, yellowed with age. Men in elaborate traditional regalia. Women dripping with coral beads. And in one photo, a young man who looked remarkably like Etim, standing tall and proud beside what was clearly a throne. "My brother," Etim said simply, following her gaze. But Ima's education hadn't been wasted. She recognized the regalia, the throne, the setting. "This wasn't just any traditional ruler. This is the Epic Palace," she whispered. "These are photos of a royal family." Etim's silence was confirmation enough. Over the following weeks, Ima began to understand. Etim cooked like a chef, spoke like a diplomat, reasoned like a philosopher. When village disputes arose, people secretly came to him for wisdom, though they'd never admit it publicly. He taught her chess using pieces carved from palm nuts, discussed international politics with insights that made her university professors seem amateur. At night, he'd tell her stories of kingdoms and kings, of power and betrayal, of curses and redemption. "These are just stories," she'd say. "Are they?" he'd reply, and something in his voice made her wonder. But it was the way he treated her that truly opened her eyes. Like a queen, with respect, kindness, intelligence. He never touched her without permission, never raised his voice, never made her feel small. In a world that had reduced her to a commodity, he made her feel precious. Slowly, impossibly, she began to fall in love, which made what happened next even more devastating. It started with the nightmares. Etim would wake screaming, his body contorting in pain that seemed beyond physical. Ima would hold him as he shook, whispering words in a language she'd never heard, ancient words that seemed to carry power. "What's happening to you?" she begged. "The curse," he gasped. "It's fighting back." "What curse?" That's when he told her everything. His name wasn't just Etim. He was Prince Etim Efik, rightful heir to the Efik throne. 5 years ago, his younger brother Etim had made a deal with dark forces, a powerful witch doctor from Cameroon who promised him the throne in exchange for his brother's life. But the loyal palace guards had been warned. They spirited Etim away, but not before the curse struck, twisting his legs, stealing his mobility, condemning him to live as a beggar while his brother ruled as an usurper. "The curse feeds on despair," Etim explained, "on being unloved, unwanted, forgotten. That's why I've remained weak all these years." "But I love you," Ima whispered. "I know." His eyes filled with tears. "And that's what's breaking it." As if to prove his point, Ima watched in amazement as Etim's twisted legs straightened slightly. Just for a moment, but undeniably. "Every act of genuine love, every moment of respect, every time you see me as a man instead of a mistake, it weakens the curse." His voice grew stronger. "But Etim knows. He has spies everywhere. He'll come for us soon." He wasn't wrong. The next morning, strangers arrived in the village. Tough men with dead eyes and expensive cars that looked obscene in the dusty streets. They asked questions about Etim, offered money for information about his activities. Chief Udo, ever the opportunist, told them everything. That night, they came for Etim. Ima woke to the sound of breaking wood. 5 men crashed into their hut, machetes gleaming in the moonlight. At their head stood a man who looked like Etim, but stronger, unmarked by suffering. Prince Etim Efik. "Hello, brother," Etim said, his voice dripping with mock affection. "Time to finish what we started." "You should have stayed hidden," Etim continued, circling Etim's wheelchair like a predator. "Should have accepted your fate. But love makes men foolish, doesn't it?" Ima stepped protectively in front of her husband. "Leave him alone." Etim laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The university girl defends her crippled beggar. How touching. How useless. He nodded to his men. They grabbed Ima, dragging her away from Etim. One of them raised his machete. "No." Etim's voice cracked like thunder. Something extraordinary happened. The air in the hut began to vibrate. The books on the walls glowed with an eerie light. And Etim, broken, helpless Etim, began to change. His back straightened. His withered muscles filled out. The twisted bones in his legs began to crack and reform. The curse wasn't just breaking, it was shattering like glass. "Impossible," Etim breathed, stepping back in terror. Etim rose from his wheelchair. Not the painful, uncertain movement of a healing cripple, but the fluid, powerful motion of a king reclaiming his throne. When he stood to his full height, he towered over everyone in the room. His presence filled the space, commanding and terrible. "You made one mistake, brother," Etim said, his voice now carrying the authority of generations of kings. "You thought power came from darkness. But true power, royal power, comes from love freely given. He looked at Ima, his eyes blazing with gratitude and adoration. My queen gave me what your witch doctor never could. A reason to be strong. The confrontation that followed was swift and brutal. Etim moved like a warrior despite 5 years of paralysis, as if muscle memory was encoded in his royal blood. Etim's men fell like wheat before a scythe. Etim himself cowered in the corner, the proud usurper reduced to a sniveling coward. But it was what happened next that would become legend. The commotion had awakened the entire village. They gathered outside the hut, drawn by the otherworldly sounds and lights. When Etim emerged, supporting the shaking Etim, the crowd gasped as one. Gone was the broken beggar they had mocked. Before them stood a king. My people. Etim's voice carried across the night air without shouting, reaching every ear with supernatural clarity. You have sheltered me in my time of need. Unknowingly, yes. Reluctantly, perhaps. But you have given me sanctuary. He gestured to Chief Udo, who had pushed to the front of the crowd, his mouth hanging open in shock. Chief Udo, you sold your niece to a beggar for 50,000 naira. Etim's smile was cold as winter rain. You will return 10 times that amount to her dowry. Consider it payment for the insults. But I don't have. You do now. Etim nodded to one of the palace guards who had apparently been watching from the shadows all along. The man handed Chief Udo a bag that clinked with the weight of gold. Etim's voice softened as he looked at his wife. Queen Ima Efik, you loved a broken man and made him whole. You saw a king when the world saw a beggar. For that, you will rule beside me with wisdom and grace. He turned back to the crowd, his voice rising with prophetic power. Let this be a lesson to all who would judge by appearances. Let it be known that kindness to the least among us is kindness to kings. And let it be remembered that love, true love, can break any curse, heal any wound, restore any kingdom. As if summoned by his words, more palace guards emerged from the darkness, along with vehicles that would transport the royal couple back to Calabar. But they wouldn't leave immediately. First, there was a kingdom to restore, justice to dispense, and a love story to complete. The coronation of King Etim and Queen Ima was the most magnificent ceremony the Cross River region had seen in generations. Representatives came from across Nigeria and beyond. The village of Ika-Ubo, now connected to the royal palace by a new road built at the king's expense, had become a pilgrimage site. People came to see the hut where a king had hidden and a queen had been born. They came to hear the story of how love conquered curse, how loyalty was rewarded, how the last became first. Chief Udo, humbled and enriched, became one of the most generous philanthropists in the region. The witch doctor who had cast the original curse was found dead in his Cameroonian compound, apparently killed by his own dark magic turned back on him. Prince Etim lived, but as a beggar in the very streets where his brother had once suffered, fitting justice for a usurper who had valued power over family. But the real magic wasn't in the curse or its breaking. It was in the quiet moments when Queen Ima would catch King Etim reading by lamplight and remember the broken man she'd married, when he would see her addressing the royal council and remember the proud girl who'd refused to be diminished by circumstance. Late at night, in their palace chambers, they were still just Etim and Ima, two people who had found each other in darkness and chosen to create light. Do you ever miss it? Ima asked one evening as they watched the sunset over the Cross River from their balcony. Miss what? Being nobody. Having nothing. Just us. Etim pulled her close, his strong arms that had once been too weak to lift a cup, wrapping around her like a promise. My love, he whispered, we were never nobody. We were always us. The kingdom, the crown, the palace, these are just decorations. The real throne has always been here. He placed her hand over his heart. In the distance, the village bells of Ika-Ubo rang out across the water, calling the faithful to evening prayers. But for a king and queen who had learned that love was the most powerful magic of all, every moment was already a prayer answered. The beggar had become a king. The prisoner had become a queen. And their love story had become legend. But perhaps most miraculous of all, in a world that often feels hopeless, where the powerful crush the weak and dreams die in dusty villages, their story whisper a truth that the human heart desperately needs to hear. Sometimes love really does conquer all. You've forgotten you're wearing one. The throne belongs to those who serve with love.